Hi, everybody. Welcome to our panel today. Thank you for joining us via Zoom and across social media on YouTube and elsewhere. My name is Tom Macmillan. I'm the Mobilization Officer for TRAC. We're the Teaching and Research Assistants of Concordia. TRAC is co-hosting today's event alongside Sustainable Concordia, so thank you for that. So just a little bit about what TRAC is. TRAC is a labor union. We were founded, labor union local. We were founded in August 2006 in Montreal, and we were certified on November 26th, 2006. TRAC Union is located on the unceded and occupied territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, who are recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters of Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Historically known as a gathering and meeting place for many Indigenous nations, Tiohtià:ke, Montreal today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We acknowledge that colonization persists, and we urge our members to become involved in anti-colonial and Indigenous-led struggles and resistance in Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, and beyond, as outlined in the TRAC Anti-Oppression and Allyship Framework, which can be found on our website. The format of today's panel will be as follows. Each presenter that you see before you will have approximately 6 minutes to present. At the end of the presentations, they will be able to ask questions of each other. After they ask questions, we will go to questions on Zoom and YouTube. Questions can be written in the chat on either platform. For those of you on Zoom, you can also raise your hand during the Q&A and voice your questions directly or comment in the chat. But first, let me introduce each panelist. And I'm going to be introducing them in the order that they will be speaking. Becca Wilgosch is a PhD student in Concordia University's Geography Department, a teaching assistant and a delegate for TRAC. She researches the just transition to ecologically and socially sustainable societies from the perspective of labor and environmental organizing. She's also a vegan, feminist, and anti-capitalist, hoping to learn how to implement community-led alternative approaches to life and livelihoods. Her presentation will introduce the Just Transition as a labor-led campaign for worker inclusion in environmental and climate policy, overview its history and current relevance, discuss divisions over green jobs and inclusivity. These critiques can guide union approaches to climate justice. Maya is a unionist, socialist, and master's student in philosophy at Concordia University. Their presentation will look at the role of academic staff and students in the massive 2019-2020 climate mobilizations in Sydney, Australia, in the wake of one of the worst bushfire seasons in history. Tom Fraser is a master's student in history, researching Ontario's public sector pension funds, as well as the grievance officer for TRAC. His writing on pensions has appeared in Jacobin and Canadian Dimension, and I might add, his third Jacobin publication came out today, so congratulations, Tom. Brett is a third-generation settler from so-called Brantford, Ontario, passionate about reconciliation, climate justice, and finding ways to foster cultural disillusioning among the status quo. After finishing a master's in globalization at McMaster, Brett made his way to so-called Montreal to pursue a graduate diploma in community economic development at Concordia. He now works as the internal coordinator for the Fee Levy group Sustainable Concordia, helping to support and advocate for a sustainable culture at the university in all the beautiful intersectional ways that looks. His presentation will introduce Sustainable Concordia, provide an overview of the organization, how they approach sustainability, and the movement towards advocating for climate justice at Concordia. And last but not least is Brian. Brian Baraga is an organizer for Divest McGill. He's also a fifth-year student at McGill studying sustainability. From 2019-20, he was the president of the Students' Society of McGill University and a student representative on the McGill University Senate, Board of Governors, and the Committee to advise on matters of social responsibility. So with that being said, I will throw it over to Becca.
Thanks. Are we going to get the slides up? There we go. Awesome. That one's not me. One more. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm a PhD student and a track delegate. I'm also a person in academia who's studying labor and development, and I'm concerned with climate justice. So not coincidentally, my research focuses on trade union campaigns for environmental and climate justice and their potential to elevate and reinforce grassroots struggles. So this is an academic perspective on union organizing for climate justice that I hope will inform practice as an academic worker. So what is the just transition? Let's start there. It refers the transition part refers to an ecological transition to a more sustainable society. In academic circles, it's often used to mean sort of a transition that is just, or the inclusion or consideration of affected people in climate policy. But often overlooked is that this originates from trade unions, most commonly cited in North America, to overcome the jobs versus environment dilemma. So the man in the picture is called Tony Mazzocchi. He's often credited with starting a major campaign that's seen as a precursor for the just transition. There was new environmental policy coming in the late 1970s and 80s in the US that was causing the closure of chemical plants. And the workers in those plants were afraid of losing their jobs, but they also lived in the communities where that was happening. So Mazzocchi organized these workers around concerns of health and safety for their communities, and basically united this idea that we need to protect workers, but we also need to make the best possible decision for the environment. Mazzocchi's big idea, which he published later, was called the Superfund. It was basically a large expansion in the welfare system to support workers, doing things like giving them really long-term income support, training them for future jobs. This never actually came to happen, but it was something they campaigned around a lot. Going into the 2000s, the Just Transition campaign went international. We saw movements arising in Australia, I think is one of the first, which we'll hear about soon. And there was a sort of a shift in focus from environmental struggles to climate justice and the transition away from fossil fuels. So we started to see these slogans like "There are no jobs on a dead planet." And we saw some really important international agreements in 2015. The Just Transition was included in the Paris Agreement preamble and also in the ILO guidelines to a just transition, the International Labour Organization, which is a really influential document. And it's recently been adopted by many governments to phase out coal. One of those governments is Canada. So it's very relevant here. As this internationalization has happened and it's been picked up by governments and private sectors, the just transition meaning has more frequently been reduced to transitioning workers into green jobs. So we can see this in the ILO's work on green and decent jobs, which is very, very dominant and widely cited. But green jobs has a lot of problems. It reduces climate justice to market intervention, investment in renewable energy for job creation, and it centers profitability instead of sustainability. So I'm not saying that we don't need to stop financing fossil fuels, because we absolutely do. But people are like rightly concerned with their livelihoods. But the green jobs frame loses this component of massive welfare expansion for everyone, like we saw in the Superfund. And it shifts the financial benefits and decision-making power from people to companies and investors. It narrows the focus on energy sector workers in the global north instead of looking at the global nature of the transition. And if we're going to go renewable energy and just replace existing jobs with green jobs, we're going to need more land and resources that are going to be expropriated by indigenous people and people in the global south in order to drive the transition in the global north. So basically furthering colonial destructive development. I think it's important that unions don't fall for this green jobs trap by focusing too narrowly on their members' interests. So through my research, I'm aiming to shed light on a few just transition dynamics that are important to climate justice and how they are pursued by unions. I think we need to pay, number one, close attention to ownership. This could take the form of support for land reform, like the land back movement in Canada. I think that would also help us to understand our reliance as a species on ecological processes. I think we need to pay attention to democratic ownership of key sectors, and we need to expand public sectors and the right to a decent life. We see this in proposals like universal basic income and making necessities like food and housing into a right and not a commodity. And I think we need international solidarity and reparations to colonized people. As an example, we can see these ideas reflected in the quote here from the Trade Union Assembly. Secondly, I would highlight participation and consultation as not being the same thing as decision-making or control. So processes to consult often build the appearance of consent for top-down decisions, but really changes in property and ownership patterns are not just going to be granted. They need to be demanded through mass mobilizations that threaten profitability and leverage the ability to stop production. So we could cite here blockades and union strikes. Third of all, I would say that alliances are the only way to build this collective power at the scale that's needed. So the mass mobilization of workers, and not just unionized workers, but also precarious workers, care workers, unpaid feminized workers, and those who are systematically excluded or relegated to undervalued work, like migrants and people of color, alongside those who've been removed from the land. So Indigenous people, peasants movements, organizations that are fighting for, and for organizations that are fighting for climate and environmental justice. So to throw it back to Mazachi and some of the other labor leaders in North America, they founded in 1997 the Just Transition Alliance, which was a coalition between frontline workers through their unions in polluting industries and fence line communities, which included environmental and Indigenous justice networks. So I would just end by saying that unions should look horizontally at how to broaden their support for other movements in ways that unite the just transition with struggles against colonial and capitalist oppression. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becca. Wonderful job. Couldn't agree more. Now, Maya will be speaking.
Great. And yeah, I have, I think, and I have the next one as well. I'll just let you know when to swap over. Hello everyone, my name's Maya. I obviously, you can tell from my accent that I'm actually from Australia, and I'm doing a master's degree here. And I wanted to talk about the Sydney Climate Justice Alliance and the lessons that it has for us today, academic workers and students. And I want to thank Becca for providing such a good elaboration of what the Just Transitions is, because I think a lot of those issues played into the debates that took place. My understanding is that the history of the climate movement and the workers movement here is really similar to what happened in Australia. So historically, the right wing was really, really successful at driving a wedge between the union movement, the workers movement, and the climate movement. Climate activists ended up being boxed in and being anti-worker, and while unionists tended to not support climate action because they were concerned about jobs. There's a very famous song in Australian environmentalism called Who's Got a Padlock and Chain, about locking onto coal trains. And one of the lines, for example, is coal mining takes your life away. It's a dead-end job, they say. It's directly confrontational to workers. And I guess didn't provide any alternative or what the next stage was. So around about the time, the late 2010s, that time that Becca's talking about as just transitions getting on the map, many sections of the union movement really began to realize that climate justice was a workers' issue and that something was needed to be done about it. And that's so clear in Australia, where the mining boom was ending. Australia is a very coal and fossil fuel reliant economy. And I think a lot of sections of the union movement saw in the long term, it was going to be against their interests. It was going to be the workers who were going to suffer as a result, not only of the effects of climate change, but also of the inevitable shutdown of the fossil fuel industry. Within a couple of key unions, the maritime union, the construction union, the electric union, they started to push and develop this idea of just transitions. And this aligned at the same time with the massive student strikes that began to be organized internationally. all of this was fantastic, but at the time it was pushing for some really, really pithy solutions. Like one of the main things, only going a few years back, the main demand was net zero by 2050. And really, and also, for example, like emission trading schemes where like, businesses or governments can just like pay off their emissions in credits. But pretty much all research has shown that it's completely bullshit. They're like, trying to make it such that the credits are something that will eventually happen in 100 years. And actually, most credits that have been bought have done nothing for climate. So it's a greenwash. I guess in this light, in late 2019, Australia had one of the worst bushfire seasons on record. And this was visible for everyone. The Sydney, like a city of 6 million people, was covered in smoke for months. I had to leave the house every day with a mask so that I wouldn't get headaches and feel sick and feel tired because the air pollution was so bad from the smoke for months and months of just hectares and hectares of bushfires burning, people having to evacuate country towns, and it being completely out of control, a direct result of climate change. And, in that, we wanted to come up with a political solution that was better than the ones that was being pushed at the time, I guess, like, by the kind of mainstream environmental movement. And the Climate Justice Alliance was a solution to that. It was a alliance of like the more radical section of the Labour movement, of radical student groups, which I was a part of at the time, and many climate organizations. And one of the most amazing things that it did was that it developed a common platform for the left arm of the climate justice movement. And next slide to have a look at what those demands were and why I think they're important. And, it's pretty incredible to get such a diverse set of people on the same page about things. And I'm not going to read through it all up, but, as you can see, some of the key things that are cutting against the dominant idea of what climate justice is about. It's 100% publicly owned renewable energy system by 2030. It's no new fossil fuel projects. Of course, at the time, firefighters were having their budgets cut whilst we had one of the worst bushfire seasons. And so one of the demands is to fund climate adaptation methods, but as well, like First Nations justice, like something that can really easily be left behind. And is a workers' issue as well, because almost all Aboriginal people in Australia are a part of the working class. They're going to be at the front line of the oppressive and terrible destruction of their traditional lands and water and way of life. So the reason why I think this is such an important lesson is that we got these groups together and we ran directly open democratic meetings. I had like a fuller slideshow where it showed one of these meetings, but in general, we would get 50 people, a lot of whom were delegates from different organizations, and we would debate out each one of these issues. So each one of these particular points was won in an extensive hours-long debate about where the climate movement was going to go and why. And what made it a remarkable thing is that there was a lot of division, there was a lot of difference, but ultimately we all got ourselves on the same page and started to mobilize and organize around these demands, which led, if you want to go back to the previous slide, just to show, because this is a rally of 10 to 15,000 people in Sydney that have been organized a month earlier. And that's my friend Seth and comrade, who helped organize this, but was also just a student activist. And it's very hard to see because Sydney Town Hall, it's the way it's built. It's like, it doesn't have a huge space, but, it's packed out all the way to the streets. And we shifted very significantly the dominant narrative around what the climate movement was fighting for. That split that the right had been so successful at cultivating for 30 years, was through a large part, was smashed by the fact that we built such a strong, unified and organized movement to fight. So obviously this presentation is about what we can do, as academic workers, as students. So a huge part of the support of this campaign came from the staff union, the National Tertiary Education Union, as well as student organizations. Because, universities are a very political place. They're a place where a lot of the ideological and social production in society happens. And people, young people especially, who are going through university, know that it's their future at stake when we're fighting for these issues, and so they're willing to go out and they're willing to fight for them. And I guess I just want to finish on the point that it's really this issue of splitting environment and labor is really fundamental. And the situation here, it seems like there's been some of that in the past. And I think our task as unionists, as people who are concerned or interested in climate justice, is to bridge that gap, is to bring rank and file workers on board with the demands of climate justice, demand that all workers in fossil fuel industries have the opportunity to be transitioned into jobs that they're interested in. Most coal miners don't necessarily like to work in coal mines. They like job security. They like workplace safety. That's what we need to be fighting for alongside. It's a climate justice issue. So, let's put this all together and let's organize and fight as an entire movement for climate justice. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Maya. Our next speaker will be Tom Fraser.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, that's the one. Great. Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to quickly thank Tom McMillan for having put together this panel today, as well as thank Becca and Maya for their presentations already. So if Becca and Maya were talking about, the imperative for a just transition driven by organized labor to drive a move away from fossil fuels and towards a more sustainable form of living, my presentation is on one of the major challenges that labor faces as far as it is concerned in terms of earnestly being able to be part of that coalition, and that is pension investments. So to briefly just kind of roadmap what I'm going to do today, I'm just going to quickly outline what pension funds are, what Canadian pension funds are, how they are deeply embedded in the fossil fuel economy, using a couple of choice case studies that I just have on the slide right here. Quickly talk about what contradictions that raises for workers who are attempting to be very active members of the climate justice struggle, and then talk about potential alternatives. And I'm going to do all of that in 5 minutes. We're going to see if it works. Okay. So first of all, I just want to quickly just define terms. So a pension fund basically pools the retirement savings of workers and invests them in capital markets so that the returns will pay out in the form of benefits for workers' retirements. So this is what's generally called a defined benefit pension plan. And they're largely the domain of workers in the public sector, because they're largely the domain of unionized workers who have been able to win pension plans through collective bargaining. So public sector workers, think teachers, bus drivers, city employees, workers like that, have their retirement savings put together and put into capital markets. And for Canadian funds in particular, one of the main kind of investment opportunities that pension funds look towards is infrastructure. So in 2018, the World Bank published a glowing report about what it called the Canadian model of pension fund investment, because of the particular focus that pension funds in Canada place on infrastructure as an asset class, which can yield pretty high rates of return. And so, what is infrastructure? Infrastructure are the sinews of our economy, the sinews of our economic life. And when our economic life is structured around fossil fuels, so too is our infrastructure. So heavy Canadian pension fund investment in infrastructure, by extension, means heavy Canadian pension fund investment in the fossil fuel economy. And so to use these two quick case studies that are illustrative as opposed to being exhaustive, they could not be more far from exhaustive if I tried. But if I were to just list off all of the different infrastructure projects that Canadian pension funds owned related to fossil fuels, we'd be here for hours. So obviously, I assume everyone in our audience today, everyone on this panel today is familiar with what's currently going on with regards to Coastal GasLink and the land defense being waged by the Wet'suwet'en in British Columbia, who are attempting to stop a liquid and natural gas pipeline from being rammed through their territory. One aspect of this that hasn't gotten as much attention is that one of the major investors in Coastal GasLink is AIMCO, which is the Alberta Investment Management Corporation, which is the investment firm that invests the retirement funds of workers in Alberta's public sector. And so at the same time as Alberta's public sector workers, many of them are trying to push the Alberta left towards a decarbonizing politics. At the same time, their pensions are directly driving not just resource extraction, but its most awful settler colonial permutations, which puts them in a very difficult position where their retirement, their capacity to retire, and their politics are placed directly in tension with one another. The same thing occurs with the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, who through their fund own Heritage Royalty, which is a land drilling rights firm. So they don't actually do any direct drilling themselves, but instead they own the land and mineral rights and sell them off to those who eventually do the drilling. And so even if they're not directly doing the drilling themselves, they're still an integral part of this fossil fuel extraction infrastructure. And again, when we think of this through a colonial lens, we realize that the entire premise of land rights in Western Canada and land extraction rights is rooted in dispossession. So again, so for Ontario's teachers, who are also, many of whom trying to engage in a radical climate politics, retirement and climate are put in direct tension with one another. And so where does that leave organized labor as it's trying to very earnestly, and I think we should take labor in good faith when it's making these efforts to push for a just transition, it means that they're in a fairly difficult place. And there are two main kind of potential political avenues that are open to labor in dealing with the pension fund contradiction when it comes to fossil fuels. So the first is divestment. So there's been pressure put upon these large pension funds by their members, by workers organizing within their workplaces to divest entirely from fossil fuels. So just a month ago, the largest pension fund in Quebec, the second largest in Canada, announced it was going to fully divest by 2022. So this was a really big announcement. It has limitations, it has caveats. I can go into them in more detail later if anyone wants to know about them, but that's one political avenue. But there's another far bigger one. It's a far more ambitious one. But if labor wants to be at the forefront of a just transition, it has to wage this, which is that if pension funds are crucial to infrastructure development, it means that pension funds can potentially be at the heart of developing green infrastructure in ways that foreground worker ownership and democratic control. So if we have a situation in which workers are able to take control of their pension funds, operate them democratically, and invest the billions of dollars in assets, which they have, like, I can't emphasize enough how big these pension funds are. Hundreds of billions of dollars are in play here. There is the potential foundation for a real labor-driven just transition in the form of worker-owned infrastructure that derives from pension investments. And so just to quickly conclude, labor is in a difficult position when they're embedded in capital like this, when their retirement is contingent upon ecological destruction, but it's not necessarily something that cannot be navigated through good organizing and an ambitious politics. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate that. Next, we'll be going to Brett.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for having me here, allowing me to speak. Wow, just taking in the speakers so far, it's really, really interesting and good work. Yeah, so who I am, where I'm coming from. I mean, Tom already read my bio a bit, but just to recap, I'm a third-generation settler from so-called Brantford, Treaty 3 territory, the territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. And my experience and knowledge largely come from academic nonprofit and grassroots spaces, generally anarchist spaces. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from today. In addition to being a bit tired and lack of sun, but it's going to be okay. Yeah, so who Sustainable Concordia is and the work that we do. So Sustainable Concordia is a fee levy group. It's been around since 2002. And their mission, broad strokes, is to act as a resource initiative, supporting and advocating for a sustainable culture at Concordia. And currently we do that through workshops and mainly campaigns model, in addition to relationship building and university accountability. Originally, we were a working groups model, similar to that of QPER Concordia, if folks are familiar, where they would provide funding and support to various student-led working groups. So for example, Climate Justice Montreal, the Sustainability Action Fund, the Concordia Greenhouses, these groups grew out of Sustainable Concordia. But around 2016, we made a shift towards a campaigns model. And yeah, so some big strides since that time that we've made over the years has been institutionalizing sustainability throughout Concordia and the Divest campaign. So with institutionalizing sustainability, that was largely through advocating for and helping to create the sustainability policy that the university has adopted, and then the ensuing sustainability action plans that came out of that, and the 5 streams from that: food, waste, curriculum, research, and climate. And that was a huge success. I mean, there's still a huge amount of work to do there, but it's a huge success in terms of the university agreeing to and putting out concrete pillars that we can now hold them accountable to and work towards. And then the next big campaign there happening alongside was the Divest campaign. That had already been going on since around 2013, I believe. And that was something that Sustainable Concordia joined into around 2016, I believe. And yeah, eventually helped to lead towards the success of that, with Concordia announcing their divestment, at least from their endowment funds, in November 2019. Yeah, so it's really, really great work there. And yeah, divestment is something that we're always following up on. Yeah, and so speaking to a bit, like taking a step back and speaking a bit to our vision and our practice as an organization, we're in a mindset of trying to approach sustainability as a concept, a practice, a way of thinking that is really nothing new. You know, sustainability being a thing that's a way of life and a way of thinking that has been around for time immemorial. And it's only been in recent history that colonial, capitalist, white supremacist institutions have come along and appropriated sustainability and used it to further green capitalism and all the rest. And we really try to, in our own practices, internally and externally, try to get back to the fact that yes, sustainability is nothing new. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's thinking about how are we sustaining ourselves internally, and then outwards, externally, in our relationships, in our classrooms, in our communities, and then outwards further in our institutions and then systems. How are we sustaining ourselves ecologically and environmentally, of course, but then also, mentally, culturally, spiritually, etc. And yeah, ultimately grounding our understanding and our practice of sustainability in an anti-oppressive framework. And then so where we're at now, after November 2019, the announcement of divestment being successful, it was like, holy shit, it actually happened. It was a big surprise to a lot of folks. And then became the work of figuring out how do we move forward and hold the university accountable. But then beyond that, for us, it was, what's our next focus? How do we want to pivot here to a new campaign? And around that time was when the murder of George Floyd took place, and there was a lot of conversation of systemic racism happening around our circles at Concordia. And so after a lot of brainstorming, we landed on a position of wanting to campaign around systemic racism being a sustainability issue. And then not long after that, the pandemic hit. We had a bunch of staff turnover. A bunch of us been dealing with a lot of personal struggles. And so it's been a really tumultuous time for us, but we're sticking to it and we're moving forward. Our current external coordinator, Paige Keller, has been working towards a model of an abolitionist campaign of trying to promote outreach to students in the community around understanding how the carceral system is not something that it exists in prisons, of course, but it also exists in the university and in the spaces that we occupy, and making those connections to both, humanize criminals and destigmatize that, and then try to help students understand how the carceral system is in and amongst the university, and then furthering that in terms of how we're sustaining ourselves in the classrooms and etc. it's all very open and fluid right now, but we're working on it, and I mean, it's exciting direction moving forward. Yeah, and I mean, I guess the last thing I'll say is where we need to go as workers in academia and the community abroad. I mean, for us, it's working on abolition as a campaign, and then it's holding the university accountable to the action plans as well as divestment. And there's a lot of work to be done there. And ultimately too, and what a couple of you alluded to is it's about decision making and changing power structures. And I think that's the real battle. I mean, like the university can put out as much stuff around the action plans and their support of the Indigenous Directions Action Plan, which is really great. But until their decision-making structures shift from the classroom up, then it's going to continue to be a battle. Yeah, that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Brett, and thank you to Sustainable Concordia for co-hosting this with us. We're really excited to keep working with you moving forward. Last but not least is Brian of Divest McGill.
Great. Just waiting for my slides to get popped up
Yeah,
here.
we're just pulling those up.
Just before we get started, just want to say it's been fantastic hearing all of your different perspectives, especially coming from a different university context. As the two Anglo universities in Montreal, there's a lot of room for us to be able to work together and co-creation and learning. And it's really nice to be able to be in the space and cross-pollinate ideas with one another. So I'll begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Baraga. I'm an organizer with Divest McGill. I'll just briefly recap the bio that was presented earlier. I'm currently a fifth-year undergraduate student studying sustainability at McGill. In 2019 to 2020, I served as the president of the Student Society of McGill University. That's the downtown undergraduate student union on campus, representing 24,000 students. As a result of that position, I was also able to serve on the McGill University Senate, the Board of Governors, and the committee to advise on matters of social responsibility, which is the committee that deals with fossil fuel divestment and decision-making and such. Next slide, please. So just a quick recap on divestment. I believe Tom and Brett briefly touched on very similar concepts. But what an endowment is essentially like a pension fund, but for a university. It's the accumulation of donations from people interested in philanthropy that go towards the day-to-day operations of the university and furthering the university's academic mission. And in the present case for fossil fuel divestment, more than anything, it's a political statement attacking the legitimacy and power of the fossil fuel industry and helping to shift the societal conversation to remove their social license to operate. Our campaign has been going on since 2012. And if you'll proceed to the next slide. In 2019, we were really happy to hear that Concordia was successful with their divestment campaign. It was also very interesting at the time because McGill was deciding on whether it would divest from fossil fuels, and being a member of that committee, Concordia was definitely part of the discussions and deliberations that we were having in that committee. So even though other universities' divestment campaigns may seem like individual events, in reality, they stack and build on one another, and it's important to keep that momentum going as we continue our fight for climate justice. Next slide, please. So as an organization that's operated since 2012, our founding goal as a campaign was to get our university to completely and transparently divest from the top 200 fossil fuel companies globally by carbon reserves. The metric that we were using was the Carbon Underground 200. which is the list of companies based on their carbon reserves. And we have been pushing for that for 9 years now. Since the campaign launch, there have been 3 different iterations of the campaign, each coinciding with a decision made by the university. One decision was made in 2015, one in 2018, and another one in 2020, all resulting in the university deciding not to divest. But most recently, the university decided to do something called decarbonize. And that's quite a bit different than the traditional understanding of divestment, in the sense that it feeds into green capitalism with this idea that by greening our portfolio and making sure that fossil fuel emissions from the different companies that the endowment's invested in is minimized across the portfolio, we'll be able to, I guess, move towards a greener economy. But that really doesn't tackle the social license aspect and the rebuke from the university that a lot of community members are asking for. But 2, it also feeds into this idea that by making things more green, by not continuing the extractive economies that unfortunately we live in today, that our university can continue benefiting off of the exploitation that the capitalist system perpetuates. So secondly, our next campaign goal is to mobilize our supporters in solidarity with Indigenous and other marginalized students on campus in Montreal and in Canada. Right now, there's an event taking place at the James Administration Building on campus with a rally in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people. McGill University has invested, I believe, $12 or $14 million in TC Energy, which is the company that is attempting to build the Coastal GasLink pipeline. So it was very important for us to be able to stand in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en and bring more attention to their cause. And third, it's to educate and mobilize our community, particularly staff, students, academic and non-academic staff, in support of bold and justice-oriented climate action. And we've been in deep collaboration with different staff, academic and non-academic unions to fight for those goals. Next slide, please. And to just briefly talk about the sort of structure that we have at Divest McGill, we believe that it's important to build the sort of society in the organizations that we work with. And our organization is built on non-hierarchy and solidarity. And so it's very important for us, obviously we've sent a delegate to this conversation and building solidarity with other groups that have the same ideals that we have. So I'll leave it there, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to all of our presenters tonight. I think you all did an incredible job. So that we've gone really deep in a really short amount of time. So that's incredible. And I loved how you each built off the other's argument and how seamlessly that flowed. So with that, I will open it up to presenters to ask questions of one another or to offer your thoughts or suggestions. And we'll do it, people can speak, whoever would like to go first. I'll let you go. Go ahead, Becca.
Sure, I have a question that I'll open up to the whole panel. So one issue about being academic workers and students is that we're only typically in the university for 2 to 4, maybe a few more years if we're doing a PhD. How can we tackle organizing in this space in such a short period of time when we're so transient?
Yeah, I guess I'll get the discussion kicked off. I know, at least for me, university was certainly a time of, finding my own identity and figuring out where my politics and my values lie. And I think that is definitely an experience for a lot of students that come on campus. You see with a lot of student union and environmental and social justice organizing that the sorts of relationships that people develop in organizing in the university space go on to affect organizing at in the places wherever these people end up. And so personally, I think the system's working pretty well as is. Lots of people are getting involved with different affinity groups and causes that they believe in. And I think it's the job of both labor unions and student unions to enable those affinity groups to be able to do their work and create solidarity between students and help see students, staff, and other people that are involved in the university community, all which is to make the world a better place.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, just as a quick thing, I also think a big part of it is building movement infrastructures that will outlast us and outlive us, metaphorically speaking, obviously, I hope at least, in terms of the duration of our time at the university. And that comes from doing, at least from a student worker side of things, that comes from doing work within the union to build up institutional memory across multiple years. It is a tension faced specifically with student worker unions that labor unions in most sectors don't have to face, wherein they have, a president who will serve a 5-year term as opposed to a single year and then they're gone. And so it really comes down to putting in a lot of conscious effort into having organizing structures that train people as they're working in order to ensure that work can be continuously kept up over longer periods of time rather than occurring within the space of a single mandate and then ending and then starting up again and then ending. So that's my main thing. It's all about, infrastructure.
And if I might just jump in, I hope I don't mind me taking the liberty of jumping in, but I would also point out that perhaps there was a time when universities were like a golden ticket to like the upper middle class. And you'd graduate and you'd have a comfortable job for life and you would no longer care about the proletariat. But most of us will never leave the proletariat, right? Most of us will be working for the rest of our lives, and so just because we leave university doesn't mean we leave the working class behind. And Brett, sorry, Brett.
No, that's totally okay. To comment further on what's been said, I think the non-hierarchical piece that you brought up, Brian, in your presentation is really huge for this. I think for movements, like a big part of making sure movements are sustained and prolonged is that people actually feel included and empowered. And where I see that falling off a lot is when decision-making structures are hierarchical. And a lot of the power is focused on like a core group of organizers, and then everyone else is just kind of left doing the grunt work, and folks aren't left feeling empowered or really involved. Like, yes, they're supporting something, but beyond that, there's not much. And so I think that non-hierarchy piece is really huge for people feeling empowered, people getting trained, people being involved, being aware, and then that's like, and it makes it much more easier and healthy for things to be passed on and shared around and much more collaborative. And then, that institutional memory piece that you touched on, Tom, is also really huge. Creating processes so that things are recorded. I think that's so hard. A thing that we've struggled a lot with at Sustainable Concordia is maintaining our institutional memory. It's so easy for our Google Drive to just become this like bottomless pit of information and history. And I think that's a big role of staff members who occupy spaces of groups that are more left-leaning and more radical on campuses. I think that's a big role that staff need to step up and to make sure that they're providing things like institutional memory and creating those structures that it's easy for students to step into and to learn about. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. What a great question, Becca. Appreciate that. Are there other questions? Maya, go ahead.
Yeah, mine is kind of like a bit of a conversation starter, as it were, a bit of a provocation. I guess like some of the solutions that have been posed to what our demand should be in the climate movement at the moment have revolved a lot around like investment funds, various like investment groups, like, pensions, university, not bursaries, what's the name, endowments, and that like our demand should be that money should be put elsewhere. And I kind of maybe want to push back on that as maybe a solution to these demands. And I kind of want to give a few reasons and then maybe have a bit of a dialogue around that. And I'm coming from someone who spent a very long time organizing a divestment campaign at my university that won. And I guess like after that, we're like, well, what did we really achieve here? Like, what did we achieve for the climate movement, because it took us 5 years to win and a lot of effort and a lot of energy. And we're like, at that stage, the climate movement had kind of moved on, and rightly so. So I guess like, when we're campaigning for climate, in my view, we're campaigning around energy, like the energy system. What's the energy system look like? How is it run? And at the moment, we have this highly like privatized energy system, where even, publicly owned sections of the energy system like feed into a private system. And that as well, like, has like huge amounts of like worker issues. So like the reason why I think that we should be demanding like, public ownership of the energy system over investment is because like, I don't think our job is to like manage capitalism and tell people where their investment should be. Like ultimately, like our jobs should be to argue for our jobs and to argue for a clean climate and not like manage capitalism, because we'll end up like on a very, very deep, dark, difficult path that we do that. So I think like the reason I think that we propose like public ownership is I think a pretty pragmatic one. Realistically, it's the same in Australia and Canada, where most union members are in the public sector. So I looked it up prior to this discussion, and in Canada, around 75% of the public sector is unionized. It's similar in Australia, and generally the density of the private sector is less. So like when we argue over investments, we're not arguing either way whether it should be a part of the private or the public sector. But when we demand publicly owned renewable energy, what we're saying is that there has to be more of a workers' voice in this. And I think as well, the means that we use to secure this are quite important, through workers' action. And I think like, what does that mean in the context of academic workers? Because we're not obviously coal workers. We're not obviously people who are directly, generally feeding into these kind of jobs. And I think our role is to like build alliance with the workers' movement, argue for public renewable energy and the shutdown of a fossil fuel industry and a just transition. And that does include as well, jobs in health and education that is going to be needed after that, which is where a lot of graduates are going to come from as well. And I think that this provides like a far better basis from which to organize with workers in the long run than it does to discuss investments. And not that I'm saying it's a bad thing to do that, but in terms of what demands that we have. I have a lot more I could say on this, but I just wanted to keep it to that simple point and have a dialogue on it.
Thank you, Maya. Tom?
So it's for precisely what you've just shared that I think pension funds are an integral terrain of struggle, and I'll explain why. So the key thing that you brought forward from the very beginning there is that huge amounts of our electrical system, our energy system, our infrastructure are privatized. Pension funds are one of the largest owners. They are one of the largest privatizers. In order to actually, achieve the politics which produces democratically owned, whether that's publicly owned or whether that's worker owned, is its own kind of internal contention. But to create publicly owned infrastructures requires taking on the investment capital that is currently rendering those infrastructures private. So to use an example that perhaps might be a little close to home for you, Sydney International Airport is owned by the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. That's a vital piece of infrastructure that's owned by a private investor and is a high carbon emitting piece of infrastructure, I might add to that. And so when we're thinking about how do we democratize our infrastructure, how do we ensure that our entire energy grids are publicly owned and publicly operated and are run for a public good and for an ecological public good, it's integral to actually directly take on who is at present the owning class of those infrastructures, which is these pension funds. And the workers who are benefiting, and I put that word in quotation marks because there's an internal conflict regarding benefits within these funds, but the workers who are hypothetically the beneficiaries of these funds are these self-same workers that you're referring to, are these workers in the reproductive sector of the economy, whether they be teachers, whether they be bus drivers, sanitation workers, nurses, this wider care economy, this decarbonized economy that we should be looking towards, where we have a labor force that's not just detached from profit, but detached from carbon as well. These are the workers who are hypothetically the beneficiaries of this privatized infrastructure. And so if we're building a union movement rooted in community, rooted in ecological justice, it's integral to identify those workers as the base of a class struggle within their union parameters to potentially take control of pension fund investment, to transfer these infrastructure properties into public ownership or into something resembling worker control in the event that a pension fund is actually able to be assumed to be a democratic entity through internal struggle. I see pension funds as representing one of the largest possible opportunities for an actual worker-owned just transition. And I do think that there are distinctions between worker-owned and publicly owned that need to be parsed through as far as figuring all this out is concerned. But it's in fact exactly because of your concerns about how do we manage capitalism, we don't want to just be managing capitalism. And that's exactly why I think it's so integral that pension funds be identified as a target head on.
I might reply.
Maya, I just want to open up to the floor first, if you would.
Okay, all right.
Would anybody else, Becca?
Sure. I would just maybe layer on to the discussion and what Maya said, because I think we're very much in agreement that it's a big worker issue as well, that pension funds are financialized in the first place and not guaranteed. And I think maybe when we're talking about this pathway towards more democratic ownership, we should also be challenging this assumption that we need to invest and have a return on investment in our future, rather than a broad social system that can actually support us into retirement, regardless of whether or not that's profitable. So yeah, just a small addition.
Maya and then Tom.
Yeah, great. And I think you're right, like in terms of like the diagnosis, like to take on, like pension funds obviously have a huge part in providing the capital investment for these fossil fuel projects. And to win this, we're going to have to take on that private capital. But I guess it's like, what is the solution to that, where I feel like we're disagreeing? Because I feel like your perspective is that we need to take control of the pension funds through some kind of internal or external pressure on the pensions to change the nature of their investments. But I don't think there can really be like pro-worker capital. Like our best solution is to like nationalize the energy system and take it out of the private hands, because that's really our alternative here. Like there's the private system or there's the public system. And the reality is like, I'm not like some like massive pro-state person, but in terms of the amount of worker control that goes on in terms of the public sector, we have far, far more ability in order to do that. And I think that as well, then the methods that we use to do that is not then directed at the pension funds themselves. It's directed politically, like at the government, in order to nationalize and take action on climate, even if it's not profitable. There's a saying in Australia, like a chant, which is renewable energy 100%, tax the rich for every cent. And that's exactly what I think we need to do. Like, let's not take private capital. Let's take the capital directly out of the hands of the capitalists. And we win that through worker struggle, through strikes, through rallies, through demonstrations. So, yeah.
I just want to just quickly kind of add it. I'm not implying that the outcome here is pension funds being the foundation of a green capitalism. That's not what I'm aspiring to. That was part of the KES's announcement when it announced its divestment. That's not what I'm here for, and that's not what I'm advocating for. What I see is there is a potential pathway through this avenue towards worker ownership, which, depending on political outlook, worker ownership can be considered to be preferable to public ownership and can be seen to be more efficient than public ownership as far as producing the sort of society we're looking to produce. I'm not talking in terms of, oh, let's just give workers the hands of capitalism and everything will be okay. What I'm talking about is having earnest democratic control. And, you know, if we want to take the syndicalist route, then we're taking the syndicalist route towards that democratic control in the form of union control over infrastructure. That's the intellectual tradition I'm coming from here, as opposed to it being, oh, like if we have control over investment policy, we can make better investments and get the rate on return. I'm not advocating here for rate on return. If you read my master's thesis, you'll find that that is nothing of the sort of what I'm advocating for.
And we can't wait to read your master's thesis, Tom. Don't. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I really look forward to reading it. Yeah, Brian, I was just going to ask, our divestment activists, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think that anyone in our collective is under any illusions that this is the be all end all. But I think we have a collective understanding that there's 3 reasons why we do the work that we do. 1, it minimizes harm to people that bear the brunt of climate injustices. I mean, if the choice is between maintaining and ending and putting it into something else that could be better, of course, that's something that we want to do. Secondly, it's also a big part of the popular education, popular mobilization, radicalization pipeline. I think a lot of people go into university, being force-fed what they've been taught, during elementary school, during high school, in the popular media about certain conceptions about how our society is. And as an organization, we exist to challenge those assumptions and to show the world for how it really is and present a better way of being able to do things. And so, as I was saying earlier, as people go through university and are involved in activist groups and move on to their new workplaces, wherever they are in the world, they can use those skills that they've learned and the political leanings that they've developed over this time to further radicalize their unions, their workplaces, in service of the climate justice that we're all trying to achieve. Thirdly, and I suppose this is more of a more recent development within our organization, is we're trying to build a coalition to democratize our university. And again, in the syndicalist tradition that Tom has mentioned, we want to be able to control the university, what it does, and how it operates through democratic means, through shared ownership and decision-making from students, from academic staff, from non-academic staff. Not in pursuit of the same capitalist production that the university is known for in the current time, but as a place for really reimagining society as how it should be. And we really see this is a key opportunity to be a model for helping uplift other social justice movements, for abolition, for other social justice struggles. But in order to be able to do that, we have to continue to use the infrastructure that we have in place, bring people to the cause, and use the connections that we have with other workers' unions, staff unions, within our student unions, to be able to bring these changes about and move towards the type of society that we need in order to be able to avoid climate catastrophe.
Great, thank you, Brian. Would anyone else like to build off of this, or is there another question?
I have one just quick thing that Brian brought to mind for me, which is that in terms of the popular education of this, I think it's also integral to think about how we ignore finance at our own peril, I think, when we focus our energies towards that which is more in our face, that which is more directly visible when it comes to the perpetrators of climate catastrophe. And even if we say we have a state where we're going to nationalize all of this infrastructure, that's still embedded within systems of debt and credit, which are still levers pulled by different actors within the financial system, large institutional investors, whether they are banks, whether they are hedge funds, whether they are pension funds, what have you. And so it's important, not just from a popular education perspective, to render those machinations visible, but is also integral because that's where a lot of the power actually lies. And so if what we want is to shut down the fossil fuel industry, depriving it of its integral oxygen is a really, really quick way to be able to do that in terms of really getting at the heart of where that power actually is. No pun intended with the word power there.
Fantastic. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to pose another discussion question. I mean, considering we're all members of unions, there's two schools of contemporary thought with how unions should operate. One's the more we need to, talk with our bosses, with the administration, and negotiate a better settlement that is agreeable to all parties. So very much the lobbying kind, the less confrontation, more collaboration point of view. And on the other school of thought, it's the more militant one, the one that doesn't believe in compromise, believes more in direct action, strikes, hard pickets, other very militant strategies for bringing about successes for the worker struggle and the student struggle. So I guess in your point of view, what do you believe is better in terms of the changes that we're looking for within the climate justice movement? I mean, is there even a correct answer? And depending on what your answer is, one way or another, how are the unions that you are currently involved in orientated towards your optimal structure that you'd like to see for your union?
That's a great question. Thank you, Brian. Who would like to start us off? Go ahead, Tom.
So on the first level, I absolutely fall into the latter school of thought with regards to what the style of unionism and what the approach of unionism should be. And in particular, when it comes to integrating a labor politics with a climate politics, I think that what is most important is having a version of unionism that's deeply embedded in community. So recognizing that the workplace is attached to wider community networks of care that determine how people kind of think politically. People think politically outside of just their workplaces. They think in their entire social life. And climate change is going to be an issue, or already is an issue, that touches every aspect of social life and is going to be dealt with on that plane. And so for unions to be, earnestly fighting for the just transition, they need to be really deeply embedded in those politics of everyday life, because those are the things that are going to have to transition. And this is where I do think that there's something to be said for how well situated the organized labor movement at present is, led as it is by teachers, nurses, etc., people in the public sector who are dealing very directly within these communities of care. As with regards to your kind of second question, it kind of circles back to what I said a little earlier about the building of infrastructure. So in our union, what we're trying to do is have solidarity wherever we can, whenever we can, with organizations leading these struggles, but also building up kind of an internal network of committees and organizers that can continue to do this work and continue to build connections with organizations like Sustainable Concordia or Divest McGill or climate organizations in Montreal and Canada more broadly. That's kind of the work that we're really focused on doing internally right now, which is hard work, but it's work that we're all happy and excited to do.
Thank you, Tom. Maya, you want to jump in?
Yeah, always happy to jump in. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely 100% support what would be called, fierce syndicalism de combat, like a fighting union, a rank and file union. The union, are the members, that's what makes it strong, and that's what really changes things. And, it's the members of the union that are going to have to organize and fight to get any changes. I don't think that we're ever going to be winning climate justice by playing nice with the ruling class. They're the ones who directly profit off the destruction of people on the planet. That's why they've swept the destruction of the climate under the rug for 40 years. And that's why now, their solutions are just like pithy greenwashing and not the real things that we have to do in order to transition our economy, not only to prevent the climate crisis, but also to make sure that working people aren't the ones who pay for that transition as well, by the destruction of job security, by the destruction of wages, by the destruction of conditions. There's a world where, we do transition away, start moving away from the climate crisis, but it brings about a terrible poverty, a terrible destruction of workers' rights, because the rich don't want to give up a single cent, and they're making us work harder in order to make that transition possible and doing nothing to prevent the impacts of it. So we're going to have to organize and fight for ourselves. And the best method we have to do that is through our union. And doing that through the union means doing it together. There's another great slogan in, the Australian climate movement, which is build solar, build wind, strike till we win. And I think that's the way to go.
Thank you, Maya. I had a feeling you might say that. Would anyone else like to, Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a really good question, very interesting question. Lots of opinions. I think with the ultimate end goal that we see at Sustainable Concordia, or if there even is an end goal, is the decolonization of the university, whatever that looks like, and if that's even possible. Now, the University of Concordia has been very, I don't know if it's strategic, but they have explicitly voiced their support for the Indigenous Directions Action Plan, which explicitly calls for the indigenization and decolonization of the university institution. And what we and lots of other people believe is what that would actually look like is, as you mentioned, Brian, completely just flipping the university on its head and having it run democratically and non-hierarchically, and changing the meaning of education and how it's valued, and making education free and all of this, and ultimately reconciling the fact that the university is built on stolen land and benefits from that, and how we move forward with that. And I think if to actually approach the university with questions of that is absolutely going to take militancy. I think to, ask them, okay, you support this action plan? And they say yes. And it's like, okay, well, then do you support free education? And do you support removing power away from your hands and putting it into, first and foremost, the Indigenous community that has occupied this land for time immemorial, and then spread that out democratically? And of course, their answer is most definitely going to be no. And then so moving forward, I guess it would have to be, it would definitely have to be militancy. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and it's exciting to work towards that. Yeah, don't know how to conclude that thought, but yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Brett. Go ahead, Becca.
Yeah, I'll be really quick because I want to have time for more questions. But I would say that I sort of theorized this green jobs problem as a compromise that comes out of the more sort of business-oriented union, the compromise. And you can see this in the ILO structure. And I think this is a big thing that holds back the International Labour Organization as a sort of a leader in this field, is that it has a tripartite structure with equal footing for employers, unions, and governments. And the end result of that is that workers can never ask for more than what the others are willing to give. And I think that's been, yeah, like a real limitation. It's something that's leading to sort of the net zero conversation. Yeah, I think if you're not willing to go against the power structures, you're just going to maintain the status quo, even if there's some compromise or compensation that happens within that structure.
Awesome. Thank you, Becca. You had a question you wanted to ask? Yes.
Oh, I did. I think, I mean, we sort of touched on this with the university, but I know that these campaigns that are pushing the university to sort of to be better, or to do different things, often look sort of internally at like, what is the university doing in terms of sustainability and investment. And I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about how to deal with the university's role in the city, because the university is a major landowner that's constantly expanding and privatizing spaces and gentrifying the center of the city. And I feel like that's relevant to this conversation as well, because they're turning these spaces into very sort of modern, carbon intensive, like, yeah, university laboratories. So maybe others want to speak to that.
Go ahead, Tom.
I think this is where it's useful to circle back to what Brett and Brian were saying about overhauling the structure of the university and thinking of that specifically in terms of decolonization. So, you know, if we conceptualize Concordia as existing on stolen land, which it does, part of tackling head on the ecological footprint and the social footprint of Concordia is taking it back to those bare bones, which is the very premise of Concordia's land tenure, which is land theft. And so I think if what we're aiming for is land back within the university, that also means land back outside of the university, in the sense that it means the land that Concordia operates on being returned to Indigenous ownership. And that, I think, does a lot in terms of dealing with the ecological footprint of the university and its wider kind of social presence within the city of Montreal. I think it needs to be embedded within a wider politics surrounding land tenure.
Maya, you look like you wanted to jump in. Okay. Just eagerly listening. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. The first one being, just to echo what Tom was saying, and McGill is built on, stolen land. The founder of the university was a slave owner who owned Black and Indigenous slaves. So there's, certainly a history there, very much deserving of reparations and land back. And, at the present time, the university is trying to expand into the Royal Victoria Hospital site up near Mont Royal. And there was a protest in support of claims by, I'm forgetting the specific group, but to halt further development of the site in order to look for unmarked graves of Indigenous children. And it took some public pressure before the university caved into that demand. But obviously, McGill as an institution wants to maintain control over that to protect their reputation, but also to ensure the continuity of the development of their project, which again prioritizes the university's aspirations at the expense of Indigenous people that they've stolen the land from. So again, this whole notion needs to be rooted in decolonialization, democratization of the university. Secondly, at least with my time in student government and working within the structures of university administration, there really doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in working within the municipal space in terms of, getting better transit access or bike routes, infrastructure that isn't directly being managed by McGill or being pushed forward by it. They seem to have more of a passive orientation. And I think that, with this democratization, there's so much room to be able to contribute more to the community, the city as a whole, and be more engaged. And like really turn our institutions into hubs that the community can go to be able to plan what they want their city to look like, and improve the infrastructure as well.
All right, thank you, everybody. Are there any further questions? We are pushing up against our 90-minute goal for this presentation. We got a little bit of a late start, so it's quite all right. But I guess I just would open the floor for anyone to make any final comments or share any final thought before we sign off. Brian, start us off.
Yeah, I guess very recently, I'm in this class. It's called Ethics in Management. I know, an oxymoron, but bear with me. And our professor was saying how the revolution is going to happen with or without us. It's up to us to determine whether we want to be an active part in it, in shaping what that's going to look like or not. There's so many different intersectional crises that we're facing in our lifetimes. Above all, the one that connects, I guess, our organizing together being climate change. There's so many different interrelated struggles as a result of that sometimes it seems so daunting to be able to think of how to solve it. But the thing that gives me hope is, having spaces like these with sharing our ideas, sharing our lived experiences and best practices on how to be able to organize the communities that we care about into, enacting change and pushing our power structures away from ones that have perpetuated the crises that we see today into one that's more community involved, people oriented, decolonial, and ones that dismantle the systems of oppression that are ever present in our society, and moving towards one where we can all live in harmony with one another, and reparate the oppression that has historically occurred. And so for me, it's been a wonderful time to be able to be here and talk with all of you. And I hope for folks that are watching on the live stream or later on that you take the discussions that we've had today and really think about what you're able to do in your day-to-day lives to help mobilize your fellow coworkers, your fellow laborers, into creating the world into the space that we want to be in.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you, Brian. I couldn't agree more. Becca?
Yeah, I would just echo that and say I think we've had a really interesting discussion. And even though we might argue small points, there's a ton of agreement within this group. So we should stay in touch, make those alliances that we talked about. And I would love to repeat this panel in maybe the coming months with community members as speakers. So let's stay in touch and make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for context, when we started talking about this panel, we thought about perhaps having another panel with other unions involved and representatives of non-university unions as well. To firefighters. Wouldn't it be great to have firefighters here talking about climate change? And wouldn't it be great to have railroad workers talking about climate change and such? So with that, I guess we can sign off. Oh, Maya? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to do a wrap-up thing as well, why not? Yeah, I guess, and I agree. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation and the debates that we've had. I guess fast to summarize, I'd say if this crisis from COVID has proved anything, it's that the ruling class would prefer mass death and prefer any dent in their profits. And I think that shows that we have such a massive task ahead of us because the fossil fuel industry is really profitable. They have a lot of power and when they're not going to stop a climate catastrophe for working people or any oppressed people unless we organize and fight for it. And I think for us, that means that we have to organize with our unions. You know, we have power in our workplaces by being able to go, you know, organize and strike. We have to, you know, build really strong and radical demands to nationalize the energy system, to shut down the fossil fuel industry, and to fund a just transition for workers and for our entire economy. So that's a massive task, but we can win it if we organize and fight together. And I'm really glad that we did just a little bit towards that tonight.
Would anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, just echoing everyone's comments. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to be in the space with y'all and to meet you and yeah, get to discuss this stuff and you know, feel that connection and hear about what's been going on and what folks are studying. Yeah, and to, you know, community at Concordia, you know, to any like professors, faculty listening, really encourage you to think about how you're making your classes, your subject matter, your teaching aligned with the sustainability policy the university's put out, as well as the Indigenous Directions Action Plan. There's a very clear call in that action plan for community support and engagement. There's been a lot of great work coming out of the Decolonial Hub, particularly around deconstructing and decolonizing syllabuses. So please, like, if you haven't already been doing that, I don't know why or how you're not, but please do. And students, ask your props, go up to them, ask them, how are you making our classrooms, our spaces, the content more sustainable and more decolonial? And don't, if they answer, I don't know, don't walk away with that. And please feel free to reach out to Sustainable Concordia for support. Much love to y'all and to everyone holding it down.
Awesome. Would anybody else like to make a final comment? Okay, fantastic. Again, thank you, everybody. This has been Academic Workers Demanding Climate Justice, our initial panel for TRAC and Sustainable Concordia. And I just want to say thank you, Brian, Becca, Brett, Maya, and Tom. You've all done a fantastic job and a service for all of us. So I would salute you and take you out for a drink of your choice if we were in person together. So with that, you can find more about us at track-union.ca and as well as Sustainable Concordia's website and Divest McGill.